The night of my wedding reception, my brother threw me into the dessert table as a joke. He laughed. Everyone laughed. I hit the edge of the table with my right wrist, crumpled to the floor, and my white dress fanned out around me like I was already something broken and discarded. The DJ kept playing. Someone handed me a napkin. Someone else said, "Oh, you know how he is." I knew exactly how he was. That was the problem. My name is Hannah. I'm 31 years old. I'm a pediatric nurse, which means I spend my days telling parents that their children are going to be okay, and I say it with a steadiness that took me years to build. I know how to keep my voice even when my hands are shaking. I learned that skill early, long before nursing school. My brother's name is Kevin. He's 4 years older than me. Growing up in our house in Dayton, Ohio, Kevin was the one our parents pointed to when they talked about pride. He was the varsity athlete. He was the one with the big laugh that filled the room and made everyone feel like they'd been let into something exclusive. He was the one who, every single time he hurt me, could look around at the room and make everyone believe it was funny. I want to be precise about what I mean by hurt. I don't mean he teased me at the dinner table or made fun of my haircut. I mean that Kevin had a pattern, from the time I was maybe 7 years old, of physical contact that always happened to cause pain, and always happened to have an audience, and always happened to come wrapped in laughter so thick you couldn't see through it to what was underneath. He'd grab my wrist and twist it in that specific way that left no mark. He'd shove me from behind on the stairs and then turn around with his hands up like he'd tripped. He'd hold my head underwater in the pool just a bead too long, then pull me up sputtering and call it horseplay. There was always an explanation. There was always a better story than the one I was living. The first time I told my mother, I was 9. She said, "Kevin is just rough. Boys are rough. Tell him to stop and he'll stop." I told him to stop. He laughed. She never brought it up again. The second time I told her, I was 14 and he'd shoved me hard enough into my bedroom doorframe that I had a bruise on my shoulder blade for 2 weeks. She looked at the bruise, pressed her lips together, and said, "You two need to work it out between yourselves. I'm not getting in the middle of this." After that, I stopped telling her. What I want you to understand, before I get to the wedding, is that I did not spend those years being passive. I want to push back against that word, passive, because it implies a kind of blankness, an absence of self. And I was never absent. I was calculating. Every room I walked into with Kevin in it, I was calculating. Where are the exits? Who's standing between us? Is he in a good mood, or is he 3 drinks in and looking for something to prove? I got very good at moving through spaces where he was present, staying in groups, keeping my distance, laughing along with everyone else, so that I didn't become the problem. The problem, when it was named, was always me, too sensitive. Couldn't take a joke. Made everything into a thing. I built a life outside of that house as fast as I could. I left for Cincinnati for nursing school at 18, and I didn't look back. I came home for holidays when I had to. I made excuses for Thanksgivings and Christmases and birthdays, and sometimes those excuses were real and sometimes they were not. But every time I sat in my apartment alone on a holiday rather than driving to Dayton, I felt something that was equal parts guilt and relief. And the relief always won. I met my husband Garrett when I was 26. He grew up in a family where people said what they meant and argued openly and hugged each other without it meaning anything dramatic. The first time he met Kevin, he drove home afterward and said, very carefully, "Does your brother know how he comes across?" I said I didn't know. Garrett let it go, because he's good at letting things go when I need him to. But I watched him, after that, at every family gathering. I watched how he positioned himself near me. He never said a word about it. He just started quietly standing between me and Kevin at parties, and I noticed, and I loved him for it. We got married on a Saturday in June, outside Columbus. It was a small wedding, 40 people, a converted barn venue, string lights and sunflowers, and everything I'd wanted. My mother cried. My father gave a toast. Kevin was there with his girlfriend, and he was in a good mood, and I told myself it was going to be fine. It was fine. Until the reception. We'd gotten through dinner. The dancing had started. I was walking to the dessert table to get a piece of cake when Kevin appeared at my elbow. and I could smell that he'd been drinking steadily for several hours, and I felt that old familiar calculation kick in. Stay calm, keep smiling, move through this. Find Garrett. He said something loud and funny to the group of people near us, something I don't even remember now. And then he grabbed me by the shoulder and spun me around, and I don't know if it was the spin or if he pushed me. But I hit the corner of the dessert table with the full weight of my body, and my right wrist took the impact and I went down. The sound I made when I hit the floor was not a small sound. I know that. I could feel it tearing out of me before I could stop it. And then the room did this thing, this collective breath, this pause. And I thought, this is it. Someone is going to say something. Someone is going to say this isn't right. Kevin said, "Oh my God, Hannah, are you okay?" He said it to the room as much as to me. He was already laughing a little, shaking his head like I'd done something clumsy and wonderful. His girlfriend made a face like a wince, half sympathetic, half amused. Someone helped me up. Garrett was there in 30 seconds. I could see by his face that he wasn't laughing. I grabbed his arm and said quietly, "I'm okay." Because that's what I always said, and I didn't want a scene at my own wedding. And so I spent the next hour smiling and moving carefully and not using my right hand. And then the guests left, and Garrett helped me out of my dress and looked at my wrist and said, "We're going to the urgent care." I said I was fine. He said, "Hannah, look at it." I looked at it. It was swollen in a way that was no longer possible to explain away. We went to the urgent care, which was closed, and then to the emergency room of the nearest hospital at 11:30 at night, me still wearing my wedding makeup and a cardigan pulled over my dress. The ER doctor on call was a woman named Dr. Morrison. She was maybe 45, short hair, very still in the way that good doctors are still, not cold, just economical. She ordered an X-ray of my wrist. She came back with the images and she put them up on the screen and she showed me two things. A clean fracture of the scaphoid bone, which is a small bone in the wrist that she explained was notoriously tricky because it often didn't show up clearly right away, and an older fracture, partially healed in the same area. She said, "This older fracture, do you know when this happened?" I thought about it. I thought about a specific afternoon when I was 17, when Kevin had grabbed my hand and bent it backward. And I'd told my mother my wrist hurt, and she'd given me ibuprofen and said to ice it. I'd worn a brace for 3 weeks. We never went to a doctor. I said, "I think I heard it in high school." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And tonight, can you walk me through how this happened?" I told her. I told her my brother had spun me and I'd hit the table. I told her it was an accident. I used those exact words. It was an accident. And even as I said them, I felt something in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet. Dr. Morrison asked me a few more questions. She asked if I felt safe at home. She asked if this kind of thing had happened before. I looked at Garrett, who was sitting in the chair in the corner, and he was looking at me very steadily, and I said, "It's been a long pattern, with my brother specifically." She nodded. She told me she was a mandatory reporter, which meant that when she had reasonable cause to believe a patient had been injured as a result of assault, she was legally required to file a report with law enforcement. She said this was not about what I chose to do afterward. I didn't have to press charges, I didn't have to pursue anything, but the report would be filed regardless, and a police officer would likely come to speak with me. I want to say that I felt relief in that moment. I think I should have. But what I actually felt was panic. The old familiar panic of a scene being made, of being the problem, of Kevin being exposed in a way that would pull the family into chaos, and everyone would look at me and the word they'd use wouldn't be brave, it would be difficult. The officer came. He was young, patient, a little formal. He sat across from me and I told him what I've told you. Not everything. Not in that first hour, but the shape of it. The shape was enough. He filed a report. He said someone from the county would likely follow up. My mother called the next morning. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail that said she'd heard what happened, and she hoped my wrist was okay, and she really thought we should talk before this got out of hand. That phrase, "before this gets out of hand," I've thought about it 100 times since. As if what was already in my wrist, the old healed fracture that I'd iced at 17 with ibuprofen, was not already out of hand. Garrett's mother, Carol. I've always called her by her first name, she insisted, called 20 minutes later. She'd heard too, through Garrett. She didn't say anything about keeping things calm. She said, I need you to know that what happened is not okay, and we're in your corner, whatever you decide to do. Then she said, do you need me to come over? And I said no, and she said, I'm coming over. And she brought food and sat at our kitchen table and didn't ask me to explain anything, just stayed. That's the thing about having someone be matter of fact about the truth of your life. It doesn't fix anything, but it makes the truth easier to hold. The county followed up. A detective called and asked if I wanted to provide a more detailed account. I said yes. Garrett sat next to me for that call. I told the detective about the wrist at 17. I told her about the pool when I was 12. I told her about the door frame when I was 14. And the stairs when I was 16. And the way Kevin always had a better story than the one I'd lived. She listened without editorializing. She asked clear, careful questions. When we hung up, I realized I'd been talking for almost 2 hours, and my voice was completely flat. The way it gets after a long shift when I've been holding everything steady for too many hours in a row. Kevin was contacted. I don't know exactly what that conversation looked like, but I know from my mother's escalating voicemails that it was not going well for him. She called 4 times in 1 week. She said I was ruining his life. She said this was a family matter and I had no business bringing strangers into it. She said he hadn't meant to hurt me. He'd never meant to hurt me. It was just the way he was. I found that last one interesting. It was just the way he was. Yes, I found that last one interesting. It was just the way he was. Yes, I know. That's the point. My father texted once. He said, I hope you know what you're doing. I didn't respond to any of them. Kevin was charged with misdemeanor assault. I was told the charge could have been higher, given the documented history, but proving the older injuries beyond reasonable doubt to a criminal standard was difficult. He was ultimately given probation, mandatory counseling, and a no-contact order that covered me specifically. I want to tell you the honest truth about how I felt when I heard this. I felt the same thing I felt at 14, showing my mother the bruise and watching her press her lips together. Not enough. It's never quite enough. And I think if I'm being honest, I had to grieve that too. The fantasy version of justice, the one where someone finally says, with the full weight of the law behind them, this was wrong, this has always been wrong, we see you, we see exactly what happened. The real version is paperwork and probation and a counselor Kevin will probably charm. And it's still something, but it is not that. What changed, though, was something I hadn't anticipated. Once I stopped managing the narrative, once I let the report be filed, let the calls go to voicemail, let Kevin face something outside of my ability to contain, I stopped calculating. I walked into my own home and I didn't run through exits and angles and moods. I sat at my kitchen table in the morning without the specific weight that I'd carried so long I'd stopped recognizing it as weight. I know that sounds like something people say, a weight lifted. I'm skeptical of phrases like that usually. But this was physical. There was a particular tension I'd held in my shoulders and jaw for so long that when it was gone, my body didn't know what to do with the space. I sat in front of the TV 3 weeks after the wedding and realized I had no idea what I'd been watching for the last half hour because I'd been so relaxed I'd nearly fallen asleep. And I started crying because I couldn't remember the last time that it happened. I couldn't remember the last time my body had felt safe enough to simply let go. I'm still in therapy. I started seeing someone about 2 months after the wedding, a therapist who specializes in family trauma, who does not let me get away with saying, I'm fine, when I mean I have not yet let myself feel this. We've talked a lot about the word complicit. We've talked about the difference between not believing something is happening and choosing not to see it. We've talked about what I owe my parents and what I owe myself, and how to sit with the fact that those things are sometimes completely incompatible. I've seen my parents once since the wedding, briefly and in a neutral location, because I decided I needed to say one thing to my mother out loud. I told her, I know you knew. I'm not telling you that to punish you. I'm telling you because I spent 20 years believing there was something wrong with my perception, and I need you to understand that there wasn't. She didn't say much. She cried. I drove home and I didn't feel the catharsis I thought I might. But I felt finished. There's something to be said for finished. Kevin has not contacted me. The no-contact order makes that simple. I've heard through a distant cousin that he's attending his mandated counseling, which I suppose is something. I genuinely don't know if it will change him. I've thought about whether I wanted to, and I think the honest answer is that I've stopped making his change my problem. That was the shift, not forgiving him. I'm not there, and I'm not sure I have to be. But removing him from the center of my calculations, removing the constant question of what Kevin might do next and who would be standing between me and the answer. Garrett and I are good. Better than good. There's something that happens when the person you married watches you go through something hard and stays. Not heroically, not with speeches, but just stays. Keeps the coffee made and the lights on and asks you every few days how you're doing in the specific tone that means he actually wants to know. That's what I got. I'm aware of how lucky that is. I've been in that hospital long enough to know that not everyone gets someone who stands between them and the thing they're afraid of, quietly, without making it a story. I'm telling you this now because of something my therapist said maybe 6 weeks into our sessions. She said that one of the most corrosive things about long-term family abuse, especially the kind that comes with a community of people who normalize it, is that you eventually start to doubt the sequence of events. You doubt the timeline. You doubt your own memory because so many people around you told a different version for so long. She said the act of telling the story in sequence, in your own words, is itself a form of recovery. So this is that. This is me telling it in sequence. The night of my wedding reception, my brother threw me into the dessert table. The ER doctor ordered an X-ray. The X-ray showed 2 fractures. One new, one old. The old one was from 1710, when I was 17 and iced my wrist alone in my bedroom because I'd learned by then that the other option was to be the problem. The doctor filed a report. The officer came. The detective listened for 2 hours. Kevin was charged. He got probation and counseling and a piece of paper that says he cannot contact me. And I sat in my kitchen 3 weeks later, watching television I wasn't watching, and my body forgot for the first time in as long as I can remember, to be afraid. That's the whole story. That's all of it. The sequence of events is mine, and I remember every single one. There's something nobody tells you about the moment things finally come to light. You expect to feel triumphant. You expect some clean, cinematic version of justice, where the truth lands with weight and everyone in the room goes quiet and the person who hurt you finally has to face what they did. That's the version I'd imagined, in small, private ways for most of my adult life. What actually happened was that I sat in an ER room at 11:30 at night in my wedding makeup, and a doctor I'd never met asked me a careful question, and I told the truth, and then I waited. That was it. That was the moment. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a question and an answer and a form filed and a phone call made. I've thought a lot about why Kevin did what he did for so many years. Not to excuse it. I want to be clear about that. But because understanding the mechanics of something is different from forgiving it, and I needed to understand it before I could set it down. What I've come to believe is that people who cause harm inside families almost always rely on one thing above everything else, the assumption that the people they hurt will keep the shape of the family intact. Kevin knew, on some level, that every time he hurt me, I would smile. I would say I was fine. I would make it easier for everyone, including him, to move forward without consequence. And he was right, for a very long time. What changed wasn't that I became a different person. I'm still the one who says I'm fine too quickly and takes care of everyone in the room before herself. Those instincts don't disappear overnight. What changed was that I stopped protecting the wrong thing. I'd spent years protecting the version of our family that everyone wanted to believe in. The one where Kevin was just rough, and I was just sensitive, and nothing was ever really wrong. The night Dr. Morrison filed that report, I stopped protecting that story. And the moment I stopped, Kevin had nothing left to hide behind. That's the part I want people to understand. The harm that goes unnamed inside a family doesn't stay contained. It spreads. It teaches everyone around it to look away, to soften the edges of what they're seeing, to choose comfort over truth. My parents looked away for 20 years, and in doing that, they didn't keep the peace. They just kept the debt. The interest compounded quietly, and eventually I was the one who paid it. In a hospital room, on my wedding night, with an old fracture on an X-ray that nobody had ever been willing to call what it was. Garrett stayed. Carol showed up with food and didn't ask me to explain. My therapist sits across from me every week and does not let me say I'm fine when I mean something else. These are the people who taught me what it actually looks like when someone chooses you. Not loudly, not with speeches, just steadily, over and over again, in the small ways that cost something. I'm not finished healing. I don't think healing has a finish line exactly. But I'm not calculating anymore. I'm not running angles in rooms. I'm not managing Kevin's image, or my mother's comfort, or what anyone needs the story to be. I'm just living in my own house, in my own life, with the lights on and the coffee made, and my body finally remembering what it feels like to be somewhere safe. That's worth something. That's worth everything.